I want to take the opportunity of this medium to welcome you to the 50th anniversary celebration of Brentwood Junior Senior High School. In the next approximately 40 minutes of this video recording, you are going to witness a number of old motion picture films, some of which have been taken and all of which have been preserved by a former principal in the Brentwood Borough Schools, Mr. Leo Harold. Brentwood High School was established in 1932. Since some of these films date back to 1938, they represent a kind of visual history of the Brentwood schools for most of the 50 years which we are celebrating during this anniversary year of 1982. Those of us who reproduce these films on videotape have found a special nostalgic pleasure in putting them together for you today. It is our hope that they will be equally pleasing to you as you join us in a trip down memory lane at the 50th anniversary celebration. Let me introduce to you now the principal to whom I referred earlier, Mr. Leo Harold, who will provide the commentary for the films which you are about to see.
Thank you, Dr. Dillon, for the very fine introduction. It is indeed a real pleasure for me to have a part in this, the 50th anniversary celebration of the Brentwood Junior Senior High School, and to recall the many happy days that I have spent in the Brentwood schools. I have often remarked that God greatly blessed me when He made it possible for me to join the Brentwood school system back in 1928. Brentwood was and is a great place to be. Here we have parents who are greatly interested in their children, and the children themselves are a joy to teach. The film you're about to see was made back in 1938 by an assistant county superintendent who did the photography work as a hobby. At this time, the color film was in its infancy, and of course, we had no sound film at that time. We are greatly indebted to the present sound squad of Brentwood High School, who have transposed this silent film into videotape for your entertainment. This work was done under the supervision of Mr. David Daly, the head of the sound squad here in the Brentwood High School, and students Sean Flanagan and Alec Yon. As the film progresses, I will attempt to identify some of the scenes in the movie and also try to identify for you some of the people that are pictured in the films. Let us now start our trip from the furthest point south in the borough of Brentwood. We saw the country club. Here we're passing the Slater Funeral Home and on in Brownsville Road. Here are some of the fine residential homes that are located around in that area of Brentwood. Coming in past Brentridge Avenue, you'll see now the former home of A.G. Kaufman, our Burgess, for some 35 years here in the borough of Brentwood. This is the original Sneed Dairy Company building. We're now passing a municipal building on the left. This is the home of Dr. Goodpasture at that time. Note the model cars that we had in 1938. We'll pass the home now of C.H. Bracken, who was the school solicitor and also the solicitor for the borough of Brentwood for many years. We're now looking over the area of Brentwood Villa from a vantage point in the Brentwood Park section. Now we see the original Lutheran Church out at the point of Brownsville Road and 51. Here's the original school building that was built by St. Sylvester's Parish just shortly before this picture was taken. This is the original St. Sylvester Church, which was then a mission church. Here's a picture of the Lutheran Church as it stands in across from the end of the car line. This is a picture of the Brentwood Christian Church that was built below street level at that time, and later the chapel was added on the street level. Here's a picture of the original Brentwood Presbyterian Church, which has been modernized and greatly enlarged since this picture was taken. We'll now get a glimpse of the borough officials that were in office at that particular time, 1938. The little man in the front there with a cigar in his hand is Burgess Albert Kaufman. Immediately to his right is Jack Thierett. Immediately to the back is Mr. Schneider. We see the tall man there, Mr. Lou Eckert, who had many offices in the borough at that time. This is Mr. Kaufman at his desk in the municipal building. You will note as we view some of these pictures that the telephone was just coming into its own, and it was quite a tool at that time, and anyone who ran an efficient office was making full use of the telephone at that particular time. This picture of the Brentwood Borough Council. There's Mr. Fred Welling walking there over to Mr. Provost, who was then the chairman of the Brentwood Council. As Mr. Provost we're looking at directly there, Mr. Harry Bracken, Mr. Jack Thierett, Mr. Lute Boone, Mr. Fred Welling. Now we'll take a glimpse at the school board. This is Mr. J.D. Boydston, the supervising principal in the Brentwood schools for some 11 years. Mr. Harry Bracken, the solicitor of the school district and also of the borough. Mr. Albert Lester, Mr. McIntosh, Mr. Sutter, Mr. Walter Colrion, Mr. George Weitzel, Mr. John Seifrith, Mr. Robert Hall. Here we see, looking in, Mr. Bracken again, Mr. McIntosh. We see the rear of Mr. John Seifrith, and to the left, Mr. Sutter, Mr. J.D. Boydston, Mr. Walter Colrion, Mr. George Weitzel, and Mr. Robert Hall. Brentwood has always had a volunteer fire department. They've always been known as a very efficient organization. Here we see them with the old trucks that they had at that time. Their ladders were just about high enough to reach the tallest chicken coop in the borough at that time. But they were nevertheless efficient. Quite a far cry from the equipment that is now to be found in the Brentwood Volunteer Fire Department. A gentleman driving the truck was Mr. Ray Bauman, who was a fire chief and a volunteer fireman for many years in the borough. This is Mr. Jack Winchell, who worked for the police department. Here's the original police car in Brentwood Borough. Mr. Otto Jordan, the chief of police at that time. We had a fine transportation system from Brentwood into the city, operated by Mr. Daniel Fike. He had two buses, like the one shown in this picture. And I can recall that he used to take us on basketball trips for a grand sum of $12 around. Okay.